At the Cradle of Monsters, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices, not with AI slop. Real storytelling that makes you feel something a machine never could. My name is Rena. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets over Lakeshore Drive at 6:47 in the morning, and nobody looked up. This was the first thing Ambassador Verath-Sei noticed about Chicago. Not the towers, not the lake that stretched to the horizon like a second sky turned upside down, gray and restless and impossibly large for something that was not an ocean. Not the smell of the city, which was the most complex olfactory experience of his 312 years of existence, a layered composition of exhaust and wet concrete and cooking food, and something biological that he could not yet classify. Not even the noise, which was considerable, and which registered across 7 of his 11 sensory channels simultaneously. No. The first thing he noticed was that it was raining on several hundred humans, and not one of them looked at the sky. They moved beneath it with the particular resignation of a species that had decided, collectively and across millennia, that weather was something that happened to you rather than something you experienced. They bent their heads into it. They opened their collapsible fabric shields, umbrellas, his briefing materials said, colloquially referred to as bumbershoots in older dialect, though this usage had declined, and they walked, shoulders hunched, eyes down, moving in 100 different directions simultaneously without apparent coordination and without significant collision. It was, Verath-Sei thought, the most chaotic and most efficient system he had ever observed. He stood at the corner of Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive and watched it for 43 seconds, which was longer than his protocol suggested he should stand still in a public space. His liaison had warned him about this. Standing still on a Chicago sidewalk, she had said, was the urban equivalent of placing an obstacle in a river. People would flow around you, and they would not be happy about it. Several of them were already not happy about it. He had registered 3 distinct expressions of displeasure in the past 11 seconds, communicated through rapid biological language, compressed lips, briefly widened eyes, a sharp exhale through the nasal passage, as pedestrians diverted slightly to avoid his stationary form. He stepped aside toward the building wall and continued watching. Dr. Elena Marsh was already late. This was, she reflected as she half-jogged down Michigan Avenue with her bag strap cutting into her shoulder and her coffee cooling in her hand, becoming a pattern. She had been late to 3 of the 6 briefings that preceded this assignment. She had been late to her first day of her postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Chicago, 14 years ago, when she had gotten on the wrong L train and ended up in Logan Square instead of Hyde Park. She had been late to her own thesis defense, which was a story she had long ago decided to simply deny whenever it came up. She was not going to be late to this. Ambassador Verath-Sei had arrived on Earth 48 hours ago. He had spent those 48 hours in the controlled environment of the diplomatic facility in Evanston, being briefed, debriefed, acclimated, and assessed. Today was the first day of what the mission documents called Phase 2, which was the part where the ambassador went into the city. Elena's job was to be there when he did. She spotted him before she reached him, which was not difficult. The briefing materials had said he would be wearing the diplomatic attire, the formal textured garment that the Venketh used for public occasions, charcoal and silver, and precisely fitted to a frame that was, at 2 meters and 11 centimeters, taller than most of the humans walking past him by a significant margin. The materials had also said that his skin had a slight gray-blue undertone that was within the range of human variation if you didn't look closely and well outside it if you did. She looked closely because looking closely was what she did. He was standing against the wall of a building on the northeast corner of the intersection, watching the rain, not sheltering from it. He had no umbrella, and the briefing materials had noted that the Venketh had no significant cultural relationship with precipitation because their homeworld's water cycle was entirely subsurface. He was simply watching it, with the particular quality of attention that Elena had learned, across 6 months of preparation and study, to recognize as the Venketh equivalent of fascination. His eyes, the outer pair, larger and set wider, which handled environmental scanning, were tracking the movement of pedestrians through the rain with the systematic thoroughness of someone cataloging data. His inner eyes, smaller and positioned closer to the center of his face, were fixed on something specific. She followed his sight line. He was watching a pigeon. The bird was huddled under the overhang of a newspaper box, its feathers puffed against the rain, its small head cocked at the precise angle that pigeons used when they were deciding whether something was edible. It was watching the street with the air of a creature that had survived in cities for so long that it had developed opinions about them. Verath-Sei was watching the pigeon with the same focused attention. Elena came to a stop beside him. "Ambassador," she said. "I'm Dr. Elena Marsh. I'm sorry I'm late." He turned his inner eyes toward her. The outer pair continued their environmental scan without interruption, which she had been briefed on, but which was still, in person, mildly disconcerting. "You are Dr. Marsh," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected, and his galactic common carried the particular precision of someone who had learned it academically, rather than through immersion. Each word given its full weight, no contractions, no dropped syllables. "Your file indicates you are rarely on time. I did not expect this to change for my benefit." She blinked. "My file says that?" "The psychological assessment section. It characterizes your relationship with scheduled time as complex." He returned one inner eye to the pigeon. "I found this reassuring. I dislike punctuality as a measure of character." "That's..." Elena paused. "That's a very specific thing to find reassuring. Punctuality suggests that a being values the appearance of competence over the experience of being present," he said. "You were late because you were navigating your environment. This suggests you were paying attention to your environment. This is preferable." He turned both inner eyes to her. "The bird is watching us." She glanced at the pigeon. It had, in fact, shifted its attention from the street to the two of them. It regarded them with the flat, philosophical expression of a city pigeon, which conveyed simultaneously that it had seen everything and that none of it had been particularly interesting. "Pigeons do that," Elena said. "They're good at reading situations." "It assessed me for 12 seconds before you arrived," Verath-Sei said. Then it resumed watching the street. "When you arrived, it reassessed. It has now been watching us for 8 seconds and appears to have reached a conclusion." "What conclusion?" "That we are not going to provide food." He paused. "It seems disappointed." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. She had been nervous about this assignment since it was offered to her. Nervous in the specific way of someone who has spent 6 months preparing for something and is suddenly confronted with the reality of it. But there was something about a 200-year-old alien diplomat expressing empathy for a disappointed Chicago pigeon that made nervousness seem like the wrong response. "Should we get coffee?" she said. He considered this. "Your file indicates you require it. The mission parameters suggest I should experience common human social environments. A coffee establishment is both." "It is," she agreed. "Come on." They walked north on Michigan Avenue, and the city walked with them. The rain had softened to a fine mist, the kind that was almost worse than rain because it didn't feel like enough to justify an umbrella, but accumulated in your hair and on your coat until you were thoroughly damp without having experienced a single definitive raindrop. The street was dense with morning commuters, the particular texture of a major city's rush hour. Everyone moving with purpose, everyone slightly annoyed, everyone accepting the annoyance as the cost of being in the place they had chosen to be. Verath-Sei walked beside her with the deliberate, measured pace that the briefing materials had described and which she was now experiencing firsthand. He didn't move the way humans moved through a crowd, which was to say, he didn't move through the crowd at all. The crowd moved around him. Not because he was large, though he was, but because there was something in his bearing that humans registered without consciously processing, a quality of presence that made people give him room without knowing why. "The buildings," he said. "What about them? They are inconsistent." He was looking up as he walked, which was something almost no one on the sidewalk was doing. Elena looked up too, following his gaze. The skyline of the loop rose around them, glass towers and stone facades, and the angular modernism of buildings from 4 different centuries standing in immediate proximity to each other. On my world, structures within a single urban zone are built to a coherent aesthetic standard. These were built across several hundred years by entities with no apparent coordination. That's exactly right, Elena said. It is visually disordered. Yes. I find it appealing. He said this without apparent irony, in the same measured tone he used for everything else. The disorder suggests independent decisions made across time. Each building is the record of a moment when someone decided to do something specific. He paused as they passed the old Wrigley Building, its white terracotta bright even in the mist. This one decided to build something that looked like it belonged in a different city entirely. The architect wanted it to look like a French Gothic cathedral, Elena said, in Chicago, in 1920, and no one stopped him. No one stopped him. Verath-Sei was quiet for a moment. I think I understand your species better for knowing this. She laughed, which surprised her. Most people think it's just an eccentric building. Most people, he said, appear not to look at it. He was right. They were passing through a stream of pedestrians, every one of them looking at their phones or at the middle distance of their own thoughts, and not one of them glancing up at the ornate white tower that had stood here for 100 years, trying to be a Gothic cathedral in the middle of a Midwestern city. We stop seeing things when they're always there, Elena said. Yes, Verath-Sei said. That is one of the things in your species file that I did not fully understand until now. The coffee shop was on a corner 3 blocks north, the kind of place that had been in Chicago long enough to have developed opinions about the neighborhood. It had a striped awning that was losing its color at the edges, and a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Best coffee in the city," which Elena knew from experience was a subjective claim but not an entirely false one. She held the door. He stepped inside and she watched his face. The inside of the coffee shop hit him in layers. She could see it in the way his outer eyes moved. First the spatial assessment, mapping the room, identifying exits and population density. The automatic environmental scan that the briefing materials said was as involuntary for the Venkath as breathing was for humans. Then the specific data points. The noise, which was considerable, 3 conversations and the milk steamer, and a song on the speaker, and the percussion of cups on the counter. The smell, which hit her every time she walked in, and which she suspected hit him considerably harder, given that his olfactory processing was significantly more complex than hers. The warmth, the steam, the particular golden light of a room that had been heated by people and coffee, and the simple fact of being inhabited. His inner eyes blinked one at a time in sequence. She had been briefed on this. It was involuntary. It happened when sensory input was high. "Ambassador," she said quietly. "Are you all right?" "I am processing," he said. He was very still. "Give me a moment." She gave him a moment. Around them, the coffee shop continued its morning business. 2 women at a window table were having an argument that was clearly about something other than what they were saying it was about. A man in a construction vest was reading something on his phone, with the specific expression of someone receiving bad news. A child of approximately 4 years old had escaped from somewhere and was standing in the middle of the room with her arms extended, spinning slowly, apparently just because she could. Verath-Sei's inner eyes found the child. He watched her spin for 3 full rotations. The child slowed, wobbled, looked up, and made direct eye contact with the alien diplomat standing by the door of a Chicago coffee shop at 7:16 in the morning. She stared at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "You're tall," in the direct, unqualified manner of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned that some observations were better kept internal. "I am," Verath-Sei agreed. "Why?" "It is how I grew." She considered this with the philosophical patience of a child who found this answer unsatisfying, but was willing to accept it provisionally. Then she went back to spinning. A woman appeared from the direction of the counter, grabbed the child by the shoulders with the practiced efficiency of a parent who had done this many times, and said something in a low voice that conveyed affection and mild exasperation in equal measure, before steering her back toward a corner table. The child looked back at Verath-Sei once more over her shoulder. He raised one hand in the gesture that his briefing materials had identified as a universal human greeting across most cultures. The child returned it with both hands, enthusiastically, before being installed in a chair. Elena realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out. "You want to order?" she said. The ordering process was, she observed, educational for both of them. The menu was a small chalkboard above the counter that listed approximately 40 options in descending order of complexity, from black coffee at the top to something called a lavender honey oat milk cortado with vanilla foam at the bottom. Verath-Sei studied it with the same systematic attention he had given the Wrigley Building and the pigeon. "What is the recommended option for a first experience?" he asked. The person behind the counter, 20-something with a nose ring and the particular calm of someone who had made coffee for 6 hours a day for several years and found it meditative, looked at him without obvious reaction. Elena had prepared for the possibility that his appearance would cause problems in public spaces, but she was beginning to think she had overestimated how much Chicagoans were affected by things that were merely unusual. The city had, over the course of its history, developed a fairly high tolerance for unusual. "Depends," the barista said. "You want something simple or you want the experience?" "The experience," Verath-Sei said, without hesitation. "Okay." She reached for a cup. 1 cortado, extra shot, cardamom. "You'll either love it or you won't, but you'll know something about yourself either way." Verath-Sei regarded her with what Elena had come to think of as his focused attention expression. "That is a very practical approach to decision-making." "That's coffee," the barista said, already making it. They took their cups to a table near the window. The rain had started again outside, proper rain this time, and the street beyond the glass was all movement and reflection, headlights and umbrellas and the abstract impressionism of a city seen through water-streaked glass. Elena wrapped her hands around her cup. Verath-Sei held his with one hand and regarded it with the expression she was learning to recognize as careful consideration before an unfamiliar action. "The temperature is high," he said. "It's supposed to be. It'll cool." He waited. She watched him wait, which was something he did with a completeness that humans rarely managed. No fidgeting, no checking anything, just the patient stillness of someone who had decided to wait and was waiting. After 90 seconds, he lifted the cup and drank. The expression that crossed his face was difficult to classify. It moved through several states in rapid succession, something that might have been surprise, something that might have been intensity, something that resolved finally into an expression she had no frame of reference for but which communicated unmistakably that something significant had just happened. "That," he said, "is remarkable. Good remarkable or bad remarkable. The bitterness is calibrated against the spice and the warmth in a way that produces a compound experience that is greater than the sum of its components." He took another smaller sip. "On my world, we have a compound that produces a similar effect through chemical stimulation. We have used it for 2,000 years. This achieves the same result through the combination of a simple plant preparation, heat, and a secondary spice." He set the cup down. "It took your species how long to develop this?" "Coffee's been around in some form for about 1,000 years. The specific preparation, maybe 100. 100 years, he said, and there was something in his voice that she might have called wonder if she'd been certain it was the right word. "To discover that combining 2 specific plants at a specific temperature produces a compound sensory experience." He looked at the cup. "How did they discover it?" "Mostly by accident," she said. "A lot of human discovery happens by accident." "Yes," he said. "I have read about this, the penicillin, the microwave oven, the post-it note." He paused. "The post-it note in particular suggests a species that does not consider failure as an endpoint." "That's one way to look at it." "It is the most accurate way." He lifted the cup again. "I would like to take this formula back with me. The cortado, the concept, the idea that combining simple elements in careful proportion produces something that transcends its components." He looked out the window at the rainy street. We have the mathematics of this, of course. We have known for 4,000 years that compound systems produce emergent properties. But we apply it to engineering, to physics, to biological systems. Your species applies it to breakfast. Elena laughed again. It was becoming a pattern. That's a very flattering way to describe a coffee drink, she said. I am not trying to flatter, he said. I am trying to understand. They sat there for 20 minutes and she let him look at the street, and she watched him watching it, and outside the city went about its morning. The subway was her idea, and she knew the moment the doors opened that it had been the right one. The Red Line station at Grand was not, in the context of the Chicago Transit Authority, especially remarkable. It was an underground station accessed by stairs that smelled of concrete and decades of human passage, lit by fluorescent lights that achieved the specific quality of illumination that made everyone look slightly unwell. Populated at 8:30 in the morning by the second wave of commuters, the ones who had either missed the first rush or had the kind of jobs that started at 9. Verath-Sei stopped at the top of the stairs. His outer eyes had widened fractionally. She had learned this meant he was taking in more visual information than his default scanning state required. The noise is different here, he said. Underground, she said. It echoes differently. There are vibrations in the structure. He placed one hand against the railing with a precision that was not quite touching and not quite hovering. The trains. One's coming, she said. You can feel it before you hear it. They went down. The platform was long and curved slightly, the walls tiled in the particular CTA pattern that had been in these stations since the 1980s and showed it. The train came in with the specific orchestral violence of a subway train arriving. A rush of displaced air, the screech of steel on steel, the mechanical percussion of a very heavy thing stopping very suddenly. Verath-Sei watched the train arrive with the focused stillness he brought to everything new. The doors opened. People poured out. People poured in. Verath-Sei did not pour. He waited for the exchange to complete, and then stepped through the doors with a deliberateness that was slightly at odds with the urgent shuffle of everyone around him, and Elena followed, and the doors closed. The car was full but not packed. Verath-Sei found a pole and held it. She had briefed him on this, on poles and the unspoken protocol of subway handholds, and looked at the car around him. Chicago pressed in from every direction, carried in the bodies and the bags and the residual smells of 40 people who had been doing other things before they got on this train and would be doing other things after. A construction worker with dried concrete on his boots read a paperback novel with the focused intensity of someone who had learned to create a pocket of privacy in public space. 2 college students compared phones with the choreography of a well-practiced ritual. An elderly woman with a cart full of groceries had arranged herself in the corner with the territorial efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 60 years. A man in a suit was asleep standing up, held upright by the press of bodies around him, his face arranged in the specific expression of someone who had decided this was fine. A baby was crying, 3 seats down, with the complete commitment of a very small human being communicating something extremely important. Its parent was conducting the particular bouncing motion that represented humanity's primary response to infant distress, rhythmic, slightly desperate, optimistic. Verath-Sei watched the baby. The baby stopped crying momentarily, apparently registering the unusual presence of a large gray-blue being looking at it from across the car. It stared at Verath-Sei with the wide, complete attention of a human who had not yet learned to pretend it wasn't staring at things. Then it reached out one small hand toward him, fingers spread, in the gesture that meant, across most human developmental stages, a desire to touch something interesting. Verath-Sei raised his hand, the same gesture he had made for the spinning child in the coffee shop. The baby made a sound that was not crying. Its parent looked up, registered Verath-Sei, and performed the rapid social calculation of a Chicagoan on the Red Line at 8:30 in the morning, which concluded, "Unusual person on the train. Child seems okay. This is not my problem." They returned to the bouncing. "The young ones are less cautious," Verath-Sei said quietly to Elena. "They haven't learned what to be cautious of yet," she said. "They just respond to what they see. On my world, the young are cautious first. It is trained early." He watched the baby, which had returned to its previous assessment of the ceiling. The instinct comes later, as they become more confident. Here it's the opposite, she said. Caution comes with experience, with disappointment. That is a sorrowful inversion. Sometimes. She considered it. But it also means children aren't afraid of things they don't need to be afraid of, or things they should be afraid of. That too. The train surfaced briefly between stations and Chicago appeared through the windows. A fast gray sky glimpse of the city from above, the backs of buildings and fire escapes and water towers and a church steeple and a parking lot full of cars that looked from above like beetles arranged by size. Then the tunnel closed back around them. Verath-Sei was looking at the tunnel wall, which was moving past at 30 miles an hour, and which had, at intervals, numbers painted on it in large white figures that indicated distances to station markers. The maintenance of this system, he said, must be extraordinary. It's actually not, she said. The CTA is perpetually underfunded. Then how does it function? People keep fixing it. She thought about how to explain this. There's a version of the system that exists in theory, on paper, with all the maintenance done properly, and all the cars replaced on schedule, and all the infrastructure up to standard. And then there's the version that actually runs every day, held together by the people who work on it knowing exactly where all the broken things are and working around them. She paused. The gap between those two versions is enormous and constant, and the trains still run. Verath-Sei was quiet for a moment. This is the post-it note principle again. In a way, yes. Your species, he said, and there was something in his voice that she had not heard before, is very good at continuing to function in conditions that would cause other systems to fail. We don't really have a choice, she said. We built the systems. They're ours. We have to make them work. No, he said. Many species that build systems allow them to fail when they become too compromised. They build new systems, you repair. We can't afford to build new systems. That is one explanation. He looked at her. The other explanation is that you are attached to the broken things. The train slowed into the next station, and people shifted and rearranged, and the baby fell asleep with the sudden completeness of a very small person whose entire being had simply decided it was time, and Chicago continued outside and below and around them. They emerged at Millennium Park at 10 in the morning, and the rain had stopped. The clouds were still there, gray and low, but they had temporarily run out of water, and the park was the specific quality of wet and bright that only exists in the brief window between rain and sun. Every surface gleaming, the puddles perfect mirrors, the grass intensely improbably green. The bean was ahead of them. Verath-Sei stopped when he saw it. Elena stopped beside him and watched him looking at it. The bean, officially called Cloudgate, though almost no one called it that, was a 110-ton polished steel sculpture that looked exactly like what it was called, an enormous mirrored bean sitting in the middle of a park in Chicago, reflecting the city and the sky and everyone who stood before it. It reflects, Verath-Sei said. Yes. Imperfectly. That's the point, kind of. The curvature distorts the reflection. Everything you see in it is a version of itself, not the thing itself. He walked toward it slowly. She stayed a few paces behind because this felt like the right distance. The park was filling up despite the gray sky, tourists and locals and school groups and a man doing yoga near the fountain with the focused serenity of someone who had made peace with being watched. A group of teenagers were taking photographs of each other in front of the bean, experimenting with angles, looking at the reflections on their phone screens. Verath-Sei walked all the way around it. She counted. It took him 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which was considerably slower than the pace at which most people circled it. He stopped at the southern face, which gave the fullest reflection of the Chicago skyline, and looked at it for a long time. She came to stand beside him. In the reflective surface of the bean, she could see both of them, distorted, curved, stretched, and compressed by the sculpture's geometry. Her own reflection looked like a cartoon of herself, head slightly too large, body curved by the steel. Verath-Sei's reflection was stranger, his proportions already unusual to human eyes and now made further unusual by the mirror's distortion. He reached out and placed one hand against the steel. Not quite touching, like he had at the subway railing. Then, slowly, making contact. Cold, he said. It's been rained on. The city looks different from inside it. He meant the reflection. The buildings curved into the steel, the sky compressed at the top, the people around them made small and numerous. Smaller. Everything fits in it, she said. The whole skyline. Everything fits in it imperfectly, he said, changed by the containing. He withdrew his hand. On my world, we value precise representation, documentation, recording, archival. We want to know what things are. He looked at the bean. You built something that shows you what things look like when they are changed by being seen. She looked at the bean, trying to see it through his eyes, which she realized she had been doing all morning. We built it because it's beautiful. And because it is beautiful, it tells you something true about yourselves. He turned to look at her. Both sets of eyes, which was unusual. He generally maintained his environmental scanning with the outer pair. Your species creates beauty as a form of knowledge. I hadn't thought of it that way. You don't need to. You do it automatically. He looked back at the bean. That is more impressive. Around them, the park continued its business. The yoga man had finished and was rolling up his mat with the practiced efficiency of a person who did this every day. The teenagers had moved on to the fountain. A dog, large, golden, ecstatically happy to be alive, was pulling its owner toward the bean with the focused enthusiasm of a being that had identified something interesting and intended to investigate it fully. The dog reached Verath-Sei and stopped. It sat down in front of him, which dogs sometimes did when they met something new, and looked up at him with the clear golden eyes of a species that had spent 15,000 years calibrating its emotional responses to the signals of another species, and was now deploying those calibrations on something outside the original parameters. Verath-Sei looked down at the dog. It is assessing me, he said. Dogs do that. They're trying to figure you out. Its assessment process is visible. He crouched, a slow, deliberate movement that brought him to the dog's eye level. The dog's tail, which had been still, began to move. It is deciding whether I am safe. Have you spent much time around dogs? In preparation? I reviewed documentation. I was not prepared for the tail. He looked at it. The tail communicates something. It means it's happy to meet you, or interested, or both. A visible indicator of internal state. He extended one hand, palm down, in the manner his briefing materials had specified as the appropriate greeting gesture for dogs. Low, non-threatening, allowing the animal to approach on its own terms. The dog leaned forward and pressed its nose against his palm with the enthusiastic thoroughness of a species that processed the world primarily through smell. Oh, Verath-Sei said, quietly. What is it? It is very warm. He allowed the dog to sniff along his wrist. And it is completely unafraid. Dogs are better at reading situations than people give them credit for. If you're not a threat, they know. It has decided I am not a threat. Apparently. The dog's owner had arrived, a woman in her 50s who was watching this interaction with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure what was happening, but had decided that her dog seemed fine, and therefore she was going to let it continue. The dog had progressed from sniffing to leaning against Verath-Sei's crouched form with the complete physical trust of a species that expressed affection through contact. He likes you, the woman said. He usually takes a while to warm up to strangers. He decided quickly, Verath-Sei said. He's a good judge. She tugged the leash gently. Come on, Murphy. The dog went reluctantly, looking back twice. Verath-Sei watched it go. He stood slowly. On my world, he said, we have companion animals, but they are calibrated to our species, our emotional states, our chemical signals, our movement patterns. They have spent thousands of generations learning to read us. He looked at the direction Murphy had gone. That animal has never encountered my species. In 30 seconds, without any preparation or training, it decided I was safe. Not based on what I look like. Based on something else. What do you think it was? He was quiet for a moment. The way I moved. The way I smelled, perhaps. Something it could not have been trained to recognize because I am not something it has encountered before. He looked at her. How did it know? She thought about this. Maybe it's not about recognition, she said. Maybe it's about something simpler, something it could feel. Intention, he said. Maybe. Then it is more sophisticated than recognition, he said. Recognition requires data. What you are describing requires understanding. They stood in the park in the gray morning light and the city moved around them, and Murphy could be seen in the distance still looking back. They ate lunch at a place on the Chicago Riverwalk. The Riverwalk had been built along the south bank of the river as it cut through the downtown, a pedestrian path below street level, parallel to the water. It was the kind of place that worked better than it had any right to, given that it was situated between a large urban river and several stories of city architecture above it, and which had become, over the years, one of the genuinely pleasant places in the city to exist. They sat at an outdoor table, the clouds had thinned enough to make this possible, and ate from containers of food from a vendor selling what the sign described as Chicago-style everything, which turned out to mean that most of it came with mustard whether you had asked for it or not. Elena had gotten a hot dog. Verath-Sei, after careful consultation with the vendor, had gotten a cup of something called Chicago Mix Popcorn, which combined caramel and cheese flavors, in a combination that she had always found baffling and which she had warned him about and which he had decided to try anyway. He was eating it with the methodical attention he brought to all sensory experiences. You were right, he said. Too much? The caramel and the cheese should not work together. The chemical compound of the salt in the cheese against the sugar in the caramel creates a feedback loop in the taste receptors that should be unpleasant. He ate another piece. It is not unpleasant. I've never been able to explain why. Perhaps that is the point. He looked at the river. The water was green-gray today, reflecting the sky, moving with the patient purposefulness of water that had been moving through this particular landscape for a very long time. Your river is colored. It's the Chicago River. On St. Patrick's Day, they dye it green. There's probably still some dye residue. He turned both sets of eyes to her. You dyed your river. Every year. For what purpose? To celebrate a cultural holiday. St. Patrick's Day is an Irish heritage celebration. She paused. Chicago has a large Irish-American population historically. The tradition started in 1962. You have been dyeing your river for 60 years as a celebration of cultural heritage. Yes. And the river accepts this. She blinked. I suppose it does. He looked at the water. On my world, our rivers are considered significant. They are subjects of legal protection and cultural reverence. We would not alter their color. He ate more popcorn. I think your relationship with your world is very different from ours. Is that bad? He considered this carefully, which she appreciated. He considered everything carefully. It is honest, he said finally. You take what your world gives you and you change it and put your mark on it. You don't pretend that your presence doesn't alter things. He looked at the river. We try very hard to leave no mark. I am not certain anymore that this is wisdom. Down the Riverwalk, a group of school children were on a field trip, their teacher attempting to give a lesson about the river's history, while half of them watched a kayaker go past, and the other half were arguing about something unrelated. One child had separated from the group and was crouched at the edge of the walk, looking at the water with the complete absorption of someone who has found something more interesting than school. There is something in the water, Verath-Sei said. Elena looked. A duck had appeared from under the bridge, followed by 5 ducklings in the precise formation that ducklings maintained when they were very young and very convinced that proximity to the parent was the only sensible response to a large and confusing world. The separated schoolchild saw them and made a sound of pure, uncontrolled delight. The teacher noticed the missing child. The teacher noticed the ducks. The teacher made the rapid assessment of an adult who has determined that the current situation is safe, and also that fighting it would be futile, and simply redirected the rest of the class toward the ducks, at which point 37-year-olds converged on the edge of the Riverwalk, to watch 5 small ducks paddle past. Verath-Sei watched all of this. The teacher changed the lesson, he said. The ducks were more educational. She made the decision instantly, without visible calculation. Teachers get good at reading what their class needs. He was quiet for a moment. On my world, educational structures are very precise. Curriculum is planned to a significant degree of specificity. Deviation is unusual and documented. He watched the children watching the ducks, their faces ranging from delight to academic curiosity, to one child who appeared to be trying to communicate with the ducks directly. What is the child saying to the duck? Elena listened. She's asking it if it has a name. The duck. The duck. Does the duck respond? Ducks don't usually respond to direct questions. And yet she is continuing to ask. She's 4, Elena said. She has a long-term perspective. Verath-Sei made a sound she hadn't heard from him before. It took her a moment to recognize it as laughter. Not the human kind, not quite, but something that served the same function, something that rose and fell and communicated that something had happened which was, in the technical sense, funny. I like your city, he said. She looked at him. The afternoon light had broken through the clouds and was hitting the river at an angle that made the water look briefly golden, and the skyline rose behind him, and somewhere nearby a street musician had started playing something she recognized as a very slow version of a song she had loved when she was 20. I'm glad, she said. The night came slowly, the way Chicago nights came in late spring, the sky darkening in stages from gray to blue to something that was almost purple before it reached actual dark. The streetlights came on, and the city transformed. This was the part she had been waiting to show him. They walked down Michigan Avenue as the evening crowd replaced the day crowd. The people who had finished work giving way to the people who were just beginning their evenings. The restaurant goers and the theater goers and the couples and the groups of friends and the solitary walkers who simply liked the city at night. The shops were lit. The restaurants spilled noise and warmth out onto the sidewalk. The reflections of the city in every wet surface had been replaced by the reflections of lights, gold and red, and the cold blue of phone screens, the neon of signs, the warm yellow of restaurant windows, the harsh white of the traffic lights cycling through their colors. Verath-Sei walked slowly. He was not scanning the way he had in the morning. He was simply looking, the outer eyes as still as they ever were, the inner eyes moving across the city with something that Elena, by now, could read clearly. He was absorbing it. The city changes at night, he said. Everything softens, she said, the edges. The noise is different. He was right. The quality of the sound had changed, from the purposeful percussion of daytime to something more complex, more layered, music and conversation and laughter and the occasional car, all of it blending into something that was less a collection of individual sounds and more an environment. In the day, I could distinguish individual sounds. Now they have become compound. Like the cortado, she said. He looked at her. Both sets of eyes. Yes, like the cortado. They stopped on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, the one that crossed the main branch of the Chicago River, and leaned on the railing and looked south at the city. The towers were lit, their reflections in the water below broken by the current into fragments of light. The Riverwalk was quieter now. A few evening walkers. A couple sitting at the edge in the specific closeness of people who had decided that this moment, right now, was the one they wanted to remember. I have been trying, Verath-Sei said, to find a word in my language for what this city is. What did you come up with? Nothing accurate. He looked at the water. We have a word for a place that is organized. We have a word for a place that is beautiful. We have a word for a place that is significant. We have a word for a place that is alive. He was quiet. Your city is all of these. But the word that would capture it would have to include the contradiction, that it is organized and chaotic simultaneously, that it is beautiful and ugly simultaneously, that it is significant because it is ordinary. He looked at her. We do not have a word for a thing that contains its opposites as a feature rather than a flaw. She thought about this. Maybe you do, and it's just a different word than what you're looking for. What word? She leaned on the railing and looked at the city. Home, she said. A home is a place that contains its opposites. The things you love about it and the things that drive you crazy and the things that are broken and the things that work anyway. A home is organized chaos. It's significant because you're ordinary in it. He was quiet for a long time. Home, he said. It's the same in any language, I think. It means the place where you belong to the contradictions. The couple on the Riverwalk below had moved closer together. The fragments of light in the water kept breaking and reforming. Somewhere south, a boat went through, and the wake spread outward, and the reflections scattered further before reassembling into something different from what they had been. I have been observing your species all day, Verath-Sei said. The pigeon, the child, the baby on the train, the dog, the teacher with the ducks, the woman asking the duck its name. He paused. Every individual I observed today was operating under incomplete information, in an imperfect environment with tools that were inadequate for the task. He looked at the city. And every individual I observed today was, by any measure I am capable of applying, fully alive. Elena didn't say anything. She wasn't sure there was anything to say. On my world, he continued, we spend considerable resources trying to achieve optimal conditions before we proceed. We plan, we prepare, we ensure that conditions are correct before we begin. He was quiet for a moment. I have been alive for 312 years, and I have never in my life done what that child did this morning in the coffee shop. What did she do? She spun, he said, without preparation, without purpose, without any apparent calculation of whether the conditions were right for spinning. He looked at the water. She simply spun because she was there, and spinning was possible, and no one had told her not to. The city moved around them, and the lights moved in the water, and the cool spring air came off the lake to the east, carrying the smell of the water and the city in equal proportion. Ambassador, Elena said. Yes. Do you want to spin? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know how, he said. I am not certain my center of gravity is calibrated for the motion. You'd probably fall over, she agreed. Yes. Most people do the first time. He looked at her. Both sets of eyes. In the nightlight, his gray-blue skin caught the gold of the city lights and held it, and for a moment she thought he looked less like something from another world, and more like something that had always been here, that had simply taken a different form. Perhaps another time, he said. Perhaps, she agreed. They stood on the bridge over the Chicago River for a long time after that, not talking, just watching the city do what cities do at night, which is to say, it kept going. It kept going in all its chaotic, contradictory, imperfect, beautiful, broken, functional, loud, soft, organized, impossible way, and Verath-Sei watched it, and the city didn't look back, but it didn't have to. The city already knew it was being watched. It had been watched for 2 centuries by people who came to it from everywhere and found, in its particular combination of contradictions, something that looked like what they had been looking for. The alien diplomat from another world who had never spun without a reason stood on a bridge in Chicago and watched the lights in the water rearrange themselves into new patterns, and Elena stood beside him, and neither of them moved, and the night went on. In the official mission log filed 3 days later, Ambassador Verath-Sei's report on Phase 2 of his Earth integration program contained one line that the mission analysts noted as atypical for formal diplomatic documentation. It was at the end of a 19-page assessment that covered urban population density, transportation infrastructure, architectural diversity, economic stratification, cultural heterogeneity, environmental conditions, cross-species communication protocols, and the sociological implications of companion-animal relationships. The final line read, "The city is not organized. It is alive. These are different things. I recommend that all future diplomatic assessments of human civilization begin from this distinction." Below it, in the space typically reserved for the official closing notation, someone, the handwriting analysis would later determine it was the ambassador himself, had written a single additional word: home.